Aloha! Hey everyone, Jeremy Vaeni. In what is perhaps, I'm assuming, I think, definitely gotta be, the final of these formal seminars for Culture of Contact, where we're finally going to get into what this thing could possibly be after having spent some time deconstructing what it is not. This thing called alien abduction, which again, a refresher, is neither alien nor abduction, nor demonic, nor trickster, although trickster stuff is used, and we'll definitely get into that today. I'm wearing my special turtle shirt for this, my Aloha turtle shirt, because I think sea turtles are my amakua. Probably not. See, I always told amakua meant like special magical animal friend in Hawaii. But then it turns out that's just kind of what like New Agey white people say. It's really like deeper than that and more about family. But if I did have a magical animal friend in Hawaii, it would be the sea turtle. Because some of you have heard this story, but I'm going to tell it again for a reason. When I first moved here and I first went snorkeling at Kahaluu Bay, I came out of the water. There's sort of like a place where you can wash up on shore, and I started taking off my fins and my mask, and someone was yelling at me from the seawall, and I was like, what are you? He's like, turtle. I'm like, what are you talking about? And I look down, and a big old sea turtle swoops up into my lap. And you're not allowed to touch sea turtles, that's illegal. So I put my hands up in the air, I'm like, I'm not touching him, and he's like patting me, he's like flippering me and like looking around at my gear, and seems just interested in stuff, and then swam back out. So I took that as a sign of welcome to the sea. And the reason it's more than fun to bring this up is that something my wife Carol told me when she moved here. I moved here first, then she moved here, and she said, I don't think you could be abducted by aliens here. I just don't think. It's almost as though there's something that would block them out. And I got to thinking about that because my experiences seem to have changed, right? Like I haven't seen any little grays or anything like that. Not even, in dream or whatever, dreams that aren't dreams. Since moving here, stuff in the paranormal realm really has sort of conformed to Hawaiian standards, if you want to call it that. Because there have been a number of events, I've talked about them on Paratopia, and they're all very Hawaiian flavored. And, when you think about, like, for instance, Jeff Kripal, the religious studies professor who also dabbles in the paranormal and the ufological, his big paranormally experience happened, or one of two, I guess it was the first one, and it was, specifically like an encounter with, I want to say, a Hindu goddess in India. And would he have had an encounter with a Hindu goddess anywhere else but India? Maybe an Indian neighborhood somewhere in America? I don't know. But it's as though, and probably is exactly, that wherever you are in the world, whatever the prevalent belief system is, or archetypal system, let's put it that way, is how you will encounter the quote-unquote paranormal. And also how the real, which I am differentiating between the real and other paranormal, how the real comes through. One wonders. Anyway, I want to decipher what I just said about the real and the unreal. But first, I want to thank everyone who has donated throughout this. David Bauman, Matt in Delaware, Pamela Hudson, Dotes, Danny Reese, Arjulad, Rob Simpson, Ko-Fi supporter, Ian, No Data Set, The Esoteric Wanderer, Christopher, and Carl Eric. Thank you for keeping me alive. All right, there is a ton to get to on this. I have an outline. It is massive. So it presumes that I know where to start, and yet I feel like I could pretty much start anywhere. Let me look at the chat here real quick. Make sure everyone can hear me. Ooh, now I'm echoey. I don't like that. Hold on. Have I been echoey this whole time? Am I echoey still? I don't know why that echo just kicked in. But chat, let me know if I'm still echoey. If not, I will continue on. If so, I will troubleshoot. And actually, I don't even need these in. Echo gone. Excellent. Okay. I don't need these here headphones. I'll just leave them in. Fixed for now. Yes. You watch the Trickster element take this show down. It's fine to tear things down. It's not then possible to like try to replace it with what might actually be going on. So, okay, let's start here. Let's start with that Krishnamurti video, once again, that I had people watch and then became like controversial because people were like, not everyone, but just a couple people were like, I don't get it. So I'll start with this, not what Krishnamurti knows and what I know from direct experience, from being alive in the way that I am and that he was, is that all of this stuff that we call meditation and we call transcendence, moving up the hierarchy of, spiritual rungs of the ladder, I guess, is nonsense. Not nonsense in the sense that you won't have an effect and you won't have visions and all that sort of stuff and feel more and more alive or whatever it is. But nonsense in that it does not bring you to wholeness, because wholeness is what happens when this partial self constantly trying to evolve and climb dissolves. Then wholeness becomes the case. And another way to put that is that when the psychological construct that is you, which is time, psychological time as a thought construct, when that is dissolved, the timeless becomes the case. Another way to put it is that truth becomes you. So that is true on the ultimate level. That is the only thing that matters actually. Like the rest of what I'm talking about in terms of like aliens and stuff doesn't really matter, because you'll come to that or not after the fact of that understanding, which completely transforms one once the brain gets it. However, we're going to delve into this anyway. But that is to say, that's how so-called enlightenment, which is really just wholeness, works. What Krishnamurti was saying in that video was that it is possible, because he is someone who was raised in the Theosophical Society, to believe that he was the second coming of the Lord Maitreya, or third coming or eighth coming, however many comings there are of the Lord Maitreya, who is like this uber entity who incarnates as like Buddha, Jesus. Like you go throughout any of the religions throughout history, and there is a belief in Buddhism or certain sects of Buddhism, and certainly in the Theosophical Society, that it is all Lord Maitreya, and that Jiddu Krishnamurti was going to be the next vessel for this god, essentially. And that furthermore, there were these spiritual masters who existed like on, it's unclear, an etheric plane. Do they exist in the Himalayas somewhere in reality? Either way, they seem to be able to come to theosophists like Charles Leadbeater and like Krishnamurti as a kid in an astral form, and they would meet up on astral planes and do astral plane things. So Krishnamurti abandoned all of that in adulthood and said, tear it down, it's not worth your time. Truth is a pathless land, there is no path to it. Okay, So he's asked in the interview, but yeah, but what about the masters and the fact that you do seem to know all this stuff? Like, aren't you somebody? Like, why are we listening to you if none of this is real? And are there masters? Is there a plan for humanity? Blah, blah, blah. And Krishnamurti essentially says in the video, people have asked me this through the years, and I have to hedge around it because to directly answer it is like they're trying to catch you in something. They're trying to, be like, aha, I knew it, masters. It's all about masters. Because people want to make it about powers and masters and mastery, and I'm special, I am in the spotlight of the master, I am a master myself. All of this stuff that we do, you know what you do. And it's time to stop doing that, because that ego thing is in the way. And usually when we say ego, we mean like our own arrogance and our own, but really it's the self, the entirety of who you are, is, this ego structure is doing, when you're doing that, that's what you're doing. It doesn't matter how arrogant or, holistic you think you are. And it's just time to stop. It's time for the body to understand that projection, that seeker trying to gain stuff is in the way, ironically, of that which they're trying to gain. But he entertained the question in this video for once and tried to say, because he was interrupted by the interviewer, and we'll get to that in a second, but he was trying to say that it is possible, essentially that you've got the human field of consciousness, which seems to have this duality to it of, for lack of a better term, good and evil. That's within the stream of human consciousness, or that is the stream of human consciousness, is good and evil. And then you've got this thing called truth. And the good and evil person can't touch truth. It is like the ground trying to touch the sky. The sky, however, can touch the ground. So is it possible that this own consciousness, this autonomy over here, truth, may send an avatar from time to time, seeing that we here, puny humans, kind of suck and are screwing it all up and aren't going to get off the wrong path, to the pathless path? Yeah, it's possible. However, the second that we see that, we interpret it in terms of our own good and evil. We bring the timeless into time the second that it is spoken, thereby killing it, because we can't touch that. We can't approach it. All we can do is screw it up, bring it into our realm and play with it as a thing of good or a thing of evil and build religions and myths around it and all of that. That's kind of what we do. We have to abandon this completely. And so, because we have done that, there are, in fact, these thought constructs, these archetypes, these, however you want to, people call them like subtle realms and things like this, of basically thought construct beings that, essentially if you are on a path, you're going to, if you really stick with it, you're going to see whatever the entity is, the God, the spirit, the pixie, I don't know whatever it is, Jesus, whatever is on that path, you're eventually going to have the experience of that being. And then that may make you think that you're in contact with truth, but you can't be. You are the barrier to truth. And so all of that is a play within the field of human consciousness. So even if you're a really good person, being, he even said, like good people, like really good people, can maybe affect the stream a little bit, can change it a little bit, but ultimately the stream is the stream. And, I talk about it as a pendulum swinging back and forth between the good and the bad, good and bad decisions. But it also, not just human stuff, there is this sense of like evil in there. I mean, it's all interrelated. This is all sort of snake-eating tail stuff in here. But nevertheless, there are these sense of like sort of autonomous beings and stuff within the field of the human consciousness. But then there's the other. So let's say that this is of the universe, and this does not include animals and plants and stuff. We're leaving them aside because that would have to be its own discussion, and I don't know how to talk to a dog or a dolphin about it. So, well, maybe a dolphin, but not a dog so much. So just in terms of we humans, we puny humans, there's duality, there's non-duality, there's the lie that we live, there's truth. Ne'er the twain shall meet until such a one gives up the thought construct. Then if truth really is a thing, truth will become the case. The timeless will come through time, through the body, through the vessel, however you want to put that. And essentially, isn't that what Krishnamurti is? Right? Like, okay. So, and he started to give the example, but then he thought it was clear enough, and the interviewer was like, yeah, that's clear, that he didn't make it explicit, but he was saying, like, for instance, he was talking about the Dalai Lama finding, reincarnating, you go and you find the child who's going to be the Dalai Lama and all that. And then you, every time I talk, there's a lizard that comes right out from behind this refrigerator. It's kind of weird. Anyway, nevertheless, that's all of that reincarnation stuff is of the human stream. And if you're looking for it, you're going to find it, that kind of thing. So, all right. This isn't to denigrate the human stream or to denigrate the universal or that which is time, but it is to say that, again, we don't know what other critters out there have the ability. We know that or I know at least, that we have the ability to be both, to be the body that is in time without the self sense also being of the body of time, and true autonomy, true free will, which is truth, right action, wisdom, all of that being the case, being that which is you. But the person who is you, has to quote unquote die for that to happen, and who the hell wants that? So it gets tricky because there are people who claim to want that. You may claim to want that because, of course, who doesn't want to be wholeness and truth and all, like this is what you've been seeking. But the problem is you have to really sit with that you don't want that, because it means, again, not adding to you, which is fine to say out loud and in theory, but in practice, it is the dissolution of the self. And if you really wanted that, you'd have dissolved by now. We wouldn't be having this chat. So it's self-evident. Okay, now, why am I bringing all of that up in terms of like this stuff with aliens and whatnot? Because my theory here is that there are two things going on with the alien abduction phenomenon. One is, and should we do this in chronological order? Well, no, I'll just say one is that the universe, one is that the real has set up an archetype or co-opted either set it up or co-opted it, I'm not sure which, of the alien to come to us because they've got to have, like, in other words, okay. I don't think these are like avatars of truth necessarily in the way that Krishnamurti was talking to Alan Nade about this. I think that they are interdimensional, but not in the sense of like moving the goalpost. Like aliens are now just they're from another planet in another dimension. That's the same as aliens from another planet in this dimension. No, I think they're interdimensional in however that they exist, wherever that they exist, and they're interconnecting with us. Like I feel like the thing that gets lost in the sense of multidimensionality is the connective tissue, that it's more like we're conjoined twins with others in other dimensions, and if they wake up to wholeness, which is the same everywhere, it's not like scientific progress or religious progress or political progress or whatever it would be that is specific to various places, or types of progress that I can't fathom because I'm not from another dimension. Like, those would be specifically located, but then there is this quote-unquote universal, multiversal, whatever, this umbrella of, or ceiling, I guess I should say, to the full expression of being. that there isn't a forever and ever evolution. In fact, I'm arguing that there is no spiritual evolution. There's awake and there's a sleep. And in a sleep, you've got a hierarchy of dead truths that have been brought into time to set them up as events in time that you can attain if you follow certain patterns and certain practices. But that when you abandon all of that, there is just the true oneness-iness, and that's true wherever you are, anywhere in existence. And so if you're a being who is woken to that somewhere else, and you understand yourself as conjoined with this sleeping giant here, do you see waking me up and waking up you as waking oneself up, one waking oneself up in another body? Right? Is that what's happening? Is that why there is this, why else would they care about like climate change? I mean, you could make an argument for nukes that maybe that reverberates down the fractal in a multiverse, but not climate change, not no. So they must care about us, and perhaps it is self-care. So what I'm saying is, if we keep this just as basic as possible, that these are beings out of time, at least in the terms of our universe, because they're not from our universe. There are, maybe they've got the same dimensionality plus, because there are other dimensions to them, of which they are self-aware and they're living in. Like if you've got, 9 dimensions or more to you, and like 4 of them are visible to us and the rest we don't know what's going on, are there beings that live in those to which we are sort of invisible until we're not, until they wake up? And then they realize themselves as the multidimensional beings that they are. If that part is clear of the supposition here, then I can carry on. Is that part clear? Can I go on? Someone in chat tell me. Anyone, just randomly tell me, yes, that's clear, or do I need to re-up that, as the kids don't say? Anyone? Puxley, anyone? Doesn't mean you have to agree, it just means it makes sense. Okay, yep, thank you. Thank you, Pamela. All right, so now that's the big supposition that we're working with here. It makes more sense to me than anything else I can think of at the moment. I'm not 100% saying that this is truly what's going on, but I'm saying that aliens and demons are not going on. I'm saying that because I am, though falling back asleep for sure, still awakened to non-duality, I know that is true. You know what I mean? Like, this is not hypothetical to me. So in other words, there is something else that y'all need to get to, I think, to like see this not in such a theoretical way. Because theoretical number one is that, is there non-duality or not? Like, I can believe in that, but I'm not experiencing that. And then furthermore, are there these beings from... I mean, you could at least eliminate the non-duality thing by having that experience. Or not the experience, but by chewing out of the cocoon of the universal. The problem is that the universe doesn't want you to do that. It does... I'm going to talk about the universe now as though the universe in which we live is an adversary. It's not an adversary, but I'm going to talk about it that way for a moment. So the universe does not want you to wake up into truth or whatever, except as, or in this, even the multidimensional thing with these beings. I've said this before, I think, on this seminar series. Doesn't want you to do that except as like casting a line to reel in novelty. Because you see, the thing that we don't experience every day, but which is true, is that all of this is always already happening. We're, the now. When you talk about the nowness, we experience time as we're going through it. But if you pull back from that, the universe, time, space, all of it, is like a living, breathing picture on a wall. And, you know, people debate whether there's free will or not free will, and ultimately it doesn't matter because it's the same to you as you're living it. I mean, that's just an interesting point to debate. There is no free will, though, in this model, except if you leave time. Then you're having a new experience, and then novelty can be brought into the universe, and then it can set up these imaginal realms that we've sort of been talking around. So that is how the universe adds novelty to itself. But it's not, so it's not an adversary, though. It's like a necessary evil. It's like the bird needs to peck out of the shell. The turtle needs to come out of his shell and walk into the ocean. If the sea turtle doesn't walk into the ocean on his own, get those muscles moving, get the sense of coordination, all that, he's gonna die. The bird, if the bird doesn't peck out of the shell, gonna die. If the pupa doesn't chew out of the cocoon, no butterfly, no moth for you, pal. Right? So you could say the shell is evil. The shell is, an adversary. It's not. It's actually helping you. It's strengthening you, getting you prepared to make the move. But it's not as mechanical as that, because from the universe's point of view, there's the self-interest of keeping you here to add more novelty, to not be transcended and included, but to, just as you and ego self want to transcend the transcendent and bring it to you, so does the universe. You are the universe, after all. If this is clear, then let us move on. All right. Okay, so yeah, you're destined to do what you're going to do until you stop, until the psychological construct that is already here stops. Now, part of the way you/the universe stops you from doing this is exactly what Alan Nade did in that interview with Krishnamurti. Alan Nade was the interviewer. I can't remember what he's famous for, but pretty sure he's a famous author, interviewer type of guy. And he's terrible. You watch the interview, it's almost unwatchable. You've got to read the subtitles, I think, to get anything out of this as you're listening, because he keeps interrupting to sort of sniff his own farts, to, psychologically, he's not saying this out loud, but it's like he wears his psychology on his sleeve, which is like, oh, look, I'm having fun imagining with you, Krishnamurti. We're on the same page, Krishnamurti. Yes, I get you. Yes, we are the same. I am asking from that altruistic place. And while he's doing that, of course, he's derailing his own interview. Here you have Jiddu Krishnamurti, who, if you're Alan Nade, you believe is, a quote-unquote master of sorts, a spiritual master. At least you know his really interesting background. I think Alan Nade believes more than just, I understand his background. I'm pretty sure he believes Krishnamurti is someone special. So you've got this someone special before you. You've got open access to ask him about, what was the truth with all this stuff in your youth about masters and you're God, you're the second coming of Christ and all this. What was the truth about that? Because you seem like a pretty on-level guy, so what is the truth about all that? You have him there, and you're able to ask it, and he's answering it, and you can't get out of your own way to allow the answer to happen, because that's what we do. You see? It's easy to say, Alan Nade, that's annoying. You're doing it too. You're probably doing it right now. You're probably bouncing everything I'm saying off of what you know, because you've got to keep it in this realm where, out of fear, you've got to, have a discernment or a judgment, or not a discernment. Discernment is necessary, but you got to have this judgment of my own personal sniff test. Well, your own personal sniff test is what's kept you here for thousands of years. So, but furthermore, I mean, I literally just had an interaction with a dude on one of these show threads that was like, I've been listening to you, I've read your books, and it's clear that he doesn't know what he's hearing. You can literally listen to me and read my books and watch these videos and whatnot and still not have a clue what's being said because, for whatever the reason is. I think the easiest answer, I'm sorry, I got to take a swig of water here. The easiest answer is that, again, self-preservation dictates that even though you've got this little inkling in the back of your mind that things aren't right, you still get the pang of something missing inside. Even after a lifetime of searching spiritually and in the occult and in the paranormal and religiously and all that, you're still partial and you know it. And so when you finally hear somebody say, yeah, you got to stop all that evolving stuff, you got to have a moment where the body, where the brain, not you, the personality being projected by the brain, but the body itself, through the act of you reading or watching or listening and sitting still with it, the brain becomes silence, right? It's not silent to get a reaction from the universe or something. It's silence itself. Silence itself. No more movement, which means no more time, which means timelessness, which means truth. Even though you know and you're hearing it and it makes sense to you, you know that that's what you need to do. There is no you doing anything in that instance. So what do? You deflect or you incorporate what you're hearing into, oh, that sounds exactly like this other guy who's saying something that's actually not what you're saying at all. You are listening, but you can't hear it. You don't allow yourself to hear it, because to allow yourself to hear it is the death of self. And just see that we're constantly doing this. And it doesn't matter how many times I say in all of these videos that y'all watch that that's what we're doing, still doing it. And that's not like an anger or a judgment thing. That's a wake up to that. Wake up to that repeating pattern that you are. All right. Now, that's just to show you how impossibly, stupidly defense mechanism we are. That is what we are. That is what the human self is, essentially, as a thought construct. It's like, go back to the basics. It's like, I've got to find food. I've got to protect. I need shelter. I need to procreate. All of that, taking in the world to understand the world and protecting yourself against the world is the backdrop of the self. And so it doesn't matter how higher and civilized we think we are. We're always still functioning from that background. Now enter the archetypes. All right. So should we deal with what archetypes are first? Well, let's go with this. I find, up until recently, archetypes to be confusing, especially Trickster, because, and I touched on this in the last seminar, listening to George Hansen talk about Trickster theory in terms of the paranormal makes it sound as though there is an entity called Trickster who's like throwing banana peels so that you'll slip and there will be a sadistic laugh at your expense. And yet, George Hansen refused to say that there is an entity involved. He would say, that's the wrong question to ask. You've got to just notice this pattern. And secretly, I was always thinking all these years, no, but he knows that there's an intelligence behind it. What is that intelligence? And I think that there are two intelligences behind it, but I also think that we need to clear up that archetypes are of the human stream, right? That they're not transpersonal in the sense of like transcending and including you spiritually or on these hierarchical rungs that we love to climb. They're actually pre-rational or pre-personal, as Ken Wilber would say, they're the pattern that is there before you're there. So just as you are born into having like 10 toes, unless you're deformed or something, you know, a human being's going to have 10 toes. A human being is going to have these personality archetypes. They're primordial that way. And so Ken Wilber, of course, has argued that this is the pre-trans fallacy. These are pre-rational, pre-personal. They're not trans-rational, transpersonal. And so working on archetypes in the Jungian way and all of that is growing up versus having transcendental spiritual experiences, which is waking up. And then he says this, and then there are people in psychology who yell at him, and then they argue about it. What I'm going to add to that is that while that may be true, all of that is still within this field of human whatever, consciousness. And, you know, all of this waking up is also in that field, so who cares? Like, we got to wake up out of all of that, not the slowly but surely waking up that Ken Wilber's talking about through various practices and rites and all of that. But it's instructive and important to realize that archetypes are these inherent patterns that if we are unconscious of them, we can slip into them and become them. We can, you know, sort of, become the archetype of the trickster or the hero or the mom or the whatever it is. You become the cliche. But then there's always, again, there's this trickster, right? And the trickster, it seems like, might be self-conscious because that's not me doing it. That's something happening to me, seemingly. And sometimes it's out there in space, and there are multiple witnesses. Sometimes it's internal, and there are no witnesses. It's dreams that are not dreams, and, you know, all of that. So what is that intelligence? And I think that that intelligence is, again, these beings from another dimension, or other dimensions, and also the universe, using this archetype of, in this case, the alien. And if we go back to, you know, it wasn't one of these seminars, but it was just sort of a tangential show of Culture of Contact that I did about the mystery airships. You look at that time in history in the 1800s when these airships were happening. What else was going on in the late 1800s, early 1900s? Oh, I know. The world was changing. Like, talk about liminality, talk about betwixt and between states of the trickster. This is literally the betwixt and between of the, not just American culture, but the entire world. The combustion engine, mass-produced electricity, you name it. The typewriter, you know, the telephone, like, all of these things that are making the world smaller and bringing us together, in quotes, you know, pseudo bringing us together as one world under like economy and just the ability to travel places, is happening. And all of these geniuses in various fields are being born at the same time. Krishnamurti, Albert Einstein, Thomas Edison, Tesla. You know, you go down the list, you look at the politics of the time, all of this crazy change is happening at the end of the 1800s, early 1900s. And that change ultimately, you know, science fiction becomes a thing. I mean, technically, I guess it had been mentioned in the 1600s from what I've read, but it really didn't take off until like 1920 as sort of an art form. But all of this change, I'm going to say, out of like religious thinking, like in terms of, I mean, people are living day to day. And I think their sense of forward thinking is in terms of like, oh, maybe there will be a judgment day. maybe the apocalypse is coming, or whatever it is, you know, like this religious timeline. That's changing now to like a future forward science-y thinking. Now technology is the way forward. Now we're thinking about the future instead of living day to day, at least in first world countries. That's sort of the thrust. Do you hear that? That's a lizard if you hear that. That's the thrust of, you know, sort of the change of how we view time and how we view ourselves, our role in the world, and like we now think like we've got someone to be and somewhere to be. Eventually that's going to lead to space. And so lo and behold, there come these airships that kind of look like what we haven't quite yet invented, these dirigibles, but they're getting there. There are these people involved with, these experiences, but they're not really people, but they kind of are. Like, it's silly putty. It hasn't quite formed. It's something that we can relate to as we are now in the late 1800s, but it's obviously not from here. It's, there's this air of mystery to it until it congeals into, the flying saucer and the gray / Nordic blonde and arguably / reptilian or whatever. But let's just stick with those two. I mean, it becomes that. And when you think about, like, I was even thinking, like, in the thing that I had read on Wikipedia, they were talking about, like, these sort of, it's almost steampunk, like mechanical / animalistic kind of beings. And what was the first sexual encounter in alien abduction literature? Was that Antonio Villas-Boas, who allegedly has, is like sort of raped by this female alien who like points to her belly and then points to the sky. But she's described as animalistic, making these animalistic noises as they're having sex and being kind of animal. So, the alien itself is amorphous and becoming a thing that we can all glom onto and imagine is really what an alien is, and the ship that it would ride in. And this all seems to be coming out of the late 1800s and then early 1900s. And then finally, here it is. And so what is creating that? Why would that be necessary? I guess this is what I wrote. As surely as we've moved into a forward-thinking, future-driven technological society, our belief that the next inevitable step is to meet or discover aliens is forming our expectation of what mystery looks like. And we see our expectation reflected back at us by the universe, or by an intelligence, or an intelligence presents it, or both. So, meaning the real, the interdimensional real, is doing this, or the universe, or both. Now it's both. I don't know what the original, I would think that the universe is sort of doing it, as we're changing, is bringing this archetypal change with it. From our point of view in time, from out of time, it's all one picture, right? Like, it's just, if you're to look at the human timeline or reincarnations, like, let's say you've lived before, a being out of time sees all of you from the beginning of that to now to the future, if there is a future. And so my question is then, would these beings all along the way be picking their spot to wake you up? Obviously, having a conversation with you isn't going to do it. In fact, prior to now, to these last few generations of people, would it even be possible? I don't know. Maybe in other cultures, Eastern cultures who are more open and accepting, but certainly I don't think Christian or Muslim cultures are going to be very open to other beings having sit-down chats with us about how the universe works. And would we be able to hear it in a way that would wake us up anyway? No. Krishnamurti spent his lifetime saying it. I told it to you earlier. Did you wake up? No. Because the conversation isn't the thing. It can only be pointed to, and then you have to sit with it. You have to be silence, right? Not a social event, not a big group meditation. You, alone, individually, have to do this. So it would be pointless to do that. I think the best thing that they could do is what they're doing, which is presenting, in a trickstery way. I mean, unfortunately, it all falls under the trickster category of like a play, of a self-negating, this is what's going on, that is both showing you that there is another intelligence involved, that is using the archetype of the alien, but is negating itself to say, look, that's just an archetype. That's just a mask that we have to wear because we're from another dimension. And the only way in is through this nebulous thing in the human collective consciousness. That's our in. And so we're here to wake you up, but we can't really tell you wake up because A, we're going to look like an alien and you're going to be like, oh, aliens. But B, and however you, or demons, or however you interpret that. But B, the act of telling you doesn't actually wake you up. So all we can do is keep screwing with your sense of normalcy, screwing with your little reality tunnel here, until you realize, oh, the reality tunnel is the thing in the way. Oh, I get it. There's no reality tunnel. And then if there is this intelligence, there it may be. The pitfalls of that, of course, are like, the odds of you becoming like delusional and paranoid and getting sucked into stupid UFO narratives and stuff is great. But if you're a lifelong experiencer, I urge you to see the folly in that and, also don't get hypnosis. All right. So why is the trickster archetype always in action with these beings? One reason is because the alien is a facade, and the alien experiences therefore must be self-negating, or else you'll think they're real and the point. Another reason is because you are the facade, right? Which is what we're getting to. You must be negated, or you will think you're the hero on a journey and never see through that. Another reason is because you will likely have other paranormal experiences from within time, and they don't want you to get bogged down there and mixed up with them, and we'll get into that in a sec. Another reason is because they use synchronicity to communicate, and that makes your life feel puppeteered by a hidden hand, which I've told you about, which feels somewhere between frightening and evil. And so with that, let's talk about synchronicity as a language. And one that points to an intelligence out of time using points in time, which is what makes it feel puppeteered. If they're outside of time and they're looking at the picture of your life and they're like, where can I make the most impact? I know, day after Jer has sex for the first time and expects us to show up. That's where we can really, that might wake him up, But also, part of the thing is that the synchronicities are callbacks to make it undeniable, right? Like, I've talked about the synchronistic callbacks. Well, let me just read my outline here. Synchronistic callbacks to make it undeniable, to make the event undeniable. So, like the time that happened, where the day after I have sex, they show up, and then I don't want that to be true, and then a year later I see the same quality of light that brought me into this experience is where my wall should be. And then that makes me realize I can't ignore that first thing. So that type of synchronistic callback makes it undeniable when I want to like fall back asleep with this and just have it be a theoretical and just a thing that I write about. And feel as though I'm in control of. But also, the synchronicity as a language keeps even multiple witness encounters personal. So some examples of that is the three-parter that I talked about. At first it was me and my friends Travis and Adam see the lights in the graveyard at Miles Standish Industrial Park. And then cut to a year later, and it's those same lights in my friend's backyard. And then cut to many years later as I'm filming in California, and there's that light as I'm telling the story of the two parts that I just said. As I'm telling that story, here comes the light. So now all three of these are multiple witness encounters. The first one is Travis and Adam. The second one was that gal who was visiting from in town. Travis, as soon as he looked up, they had gone out, so he didn't see it, but she did. She saw it first, actually, and then I saw it. And then the third time was Jed Olson and I see the light, and everyone else doesn't see it. And when they look, it's got, as soon as I go to point it out, it's gone. So there is an example. I think that's a pretty good one. Another example is the Ghost of Gettysburg. When Jeff and I and a group of, some of his family and a group of Paratopia listeners go to Mark Nesbitt's place to do the ghost hunting thing. It's only after the ghost hunting expedition is over that the UFO thing shows up in the sky or two UFOs, whatever, at least two different colored lights, at the bus station. So that's, a multi-witness thing. That's also directional. Only Jeff and I can see this. We're surrounded by people outdoors, and none of them are looking up. And they can see that we're kind of like interested in something, but none of them are taking an interest, even hey, what are they looking at? Or if they are, they're not seeing it. Then, of course, there's the Vermont UFO that was for me in the sense that, yes, there are other witnesses, my mom and my sister, but they block it out and don't care. My sister doesn't see it at all. My mom doesn't remember seeing it until I really keep pressing her, for a year or two, whatever it is. I think it's 2. And then finally she's like, oh, yeah, but it doesn't affect their lives. They don't care. So even in the sense of there being multiple witnesses, once again, there is still this sense that it's actually for me. But if I say that, it sounds like, oh, I'm special, I'm on a journey, right? This is the conundrum. Yeah, it's important to start seeing through all of this stuff, how it's all working, right? The other one that I wanted to mention here is the Ouija board incident. So let me pull, this is the one time I'm going to pull something up here, which is, yes. Hello, Pamela. This is your blog, Life at the End of the World. Can I see this myself? Wait. Sorry, I'm just trying to make this big enough for moi. Okay. Well, here we go. Okay. So, Life at the End of the World. This is random thoughts about online abductee support groups and the nature of evil. This is Pamela Hudson's blog here, and I'm going to skip down to the thing she says here on evil. I used to think that most demonic... By the way, you should read this. You should read her blog. I'll link to it in the description after the show. It's good. But she says, I used to think that most demonic phenomena were examples of displaced human emotion, when human beings practiced religions that encouraged goodness and holiness and so forth, leaving no room for other less shiny emotions and behaviors. That constellation of forbidden, shunned feelings... that constellation of forbidden, shunned feelings is too easily perceived as other, even as demonic. But as I've gotten older, it has become clear to me that supernatural evil is real. That kind of evil is not the kind that makes a good, scary movie. It is often disguised as something banal or even attractive, at least at first. Acquaintances said that serial killer Ted Bundy was good-looking and charming, and his suburban neighbors seemed to agree. Ufology is not immune to evil sneaking in on the coattails of deception, shiny eyes, and too much smiling. Heaven's Gate seemed harmless enough, if more than a little goofy and controlling, until in 1997, 39 of its remaining members committed suicide. I have a physical response to evil, even, especially, if it looks friendly. I get nauseous. My head hurts. A certain pain that isn't a pain plagues me until I get away from it. A number of years ago, a friend gave me a YouTube link knowing I was interested in ufology. I called it up. The link showed a beautiful blonde woman in scarves and bangles and lots of gauze clothing sitting on what looks for all the world like a throne. She was surrounded by acolytes and showing off intricate drawings of the structure of reality channeled through her, she claimed, by ascended masters. Yeah, okay, whatever. Normally, this kind of thing just provokes an eye roll and sarcastic snort from me, but this time I got a bit of a wave of nausea and that pain that isn't a pain, but it's still very loud. And I thought, ooh, this bitch has latched onto something lying and horrible, so I clicked off. It's like that old saw about art, or was it pornography? I can't tell you exactly what supernatural evil is, but I know it when I see it. I also know for sure one way evil does not enter the world is through this, Ouija boards. Who mostly uses Ouija boards? Adolescents, that's who. Adolescents have a ton of confused, mischievous energy that has nowhere to go. We should really thank Ouija boards for dissipating some of that energy, turning it into radios that play without being plugged in, conjuring scary answering machine messages from demonic voices, and knocking on the walls, tipping tables, breaking dishes, blowing drapes around, and instigating candle tomfoolery. No one has ever died from any of these things. And you can read the rest on your own. I just wanted to read that to you because, as I like to say, winner, winner, chicken dinner. Yeah, I mean, as you'll recall, most of that is referring back to the Ouija board stuff that I was talking about. And I've gone on to, of course, read, like you always see in movies, the thing about prepubescent girls or girls on the cusp of puberty, children in general, but generally girls. That somehow that creates paranormal events in the house and all of that. And so I went to look up, is that real or is that just a movie trope? And it seems that there is research on this, which I was going to read to you, but this is going to be long enough as it is. So what this gets to is, yeah, there is like an evil of it. There's the evil that people do. Then there is the sort of evil of its own accord, which I don't know that you would call this. I mean, the sense of like a person who channels crap or a cult leader who believes crap can be the evil that people do, right? Especially the cult leader. But could it not also be just the universe again, keeping you occupied with the things you love? You create your own reality. The universe would love you to create your own reality. The real would love you to not be that reality anymore. But then there's this other thing of like, right, the Ouija board stuff, nobody's ever died from the Ouija board. We had all this crazy, spooky stuff happen. No one died from it because that too is of the universe, either from kids hitting puberty or, just past puberty, going into adulthood, concentrating all of their energy into this or whatever it is. But here's the rub. So the week that we were doing the Ouija board stuff, and then there was that week that we were supposed to be tested, if you'll recall. And then that is the week when something walks into my bedroom, a shadowy being babbling at me with a long pointy thing in its hand. And I immediately say, Ma, what are you doing? Go back to sleep. And immediately think, this isn't your mother. You know what this is. So what I'm going to suggest to you happened that night is the real came in and said, picked the spot, put threw the dart at the board of my life from outside the universe and said that is going to be the moment where we come in and show him, or he will intuit, or whatever, that this is not demonic. This is not from the Ouija board sessions that you're doing right now. We're going to come into the middle of this crazy week because we don't want you to get derailed into that. We need you to wake up. So we're going to insert ourselves here, and you're going to know that this isn't your mom walking into your room. In fact, later in life, I have a waking, whatever you call those, the waking fantasies or the waking dreams of my mom walking into my room, sitting down on my bed, kissing me before she goes off to work. And the entire time I knew that it was a hallucination. The entire time it was happening, I knew it was a hallucination. Felt good, so I let it play out, but I knew it. And in the instance of the so-called alien, I knew that that wasn't a hallucination. I knew that that wasn't my mother. I knew what that was, but I didn't know what that was. Right? I knew it wasn't the demon stuff of the Ouija board. I always knew that. And it always made me feel queasy because, like, how much can happen to one person? During Ouija board week, aliens walk into your room. Like, no, this is not, you got to pick one. You can't tell the whole story or you're going to sound even more like a lunatic than you feel. But isn't it interesting that I had that very feeling that experiencers report of, you know what this is. When it's there, it's as if they know you better than you know yourself. It's as if there's some unconscious way in which you know exactly what this is, but nobody tells you what it is. And if you're to ask me, what is it? You know, this sense of like, this isn't your mother, you know what this is. I mean, there is no further revelation of it's aliens. It's something that at that age, I wouldn't be able to comprehend. I wouldn't be able to comprehend interdimensional whatever. It's only now as an adult that I could sort of piece this together. So if that's what it is, or if it's something from truth and we're from here, from the human stream that ne'er the twain shall meet until I die and dissolve into truth, I'm not going to get all that. But it's important for me to know not to follow the Ouija board stuff because that's just the universe babbling at me, or my own self as the universe babbling at me. Having fun on a scary, spooky ride, right? It's important to tell me. Not that. And since you think that this is aliens, but not really, because I was reading Whitley Strieber, who was saying, you know, visitors, don't call them aliens, we don't know what they are. So it's mystery. It's mystery with a capital M. It's the unknowable. The unknowable is coming, and I'm saying, I recognize that. I know what that is. I don't know what that is. But I know what it is not. It is not the alien. It is not my mom. It's not a hallucination. It's not demons. But it is this thing that has loosely been called alien abduction, which Strieber says call them visitors. At that age, I know that. So, because the universe is reacting to your being enticed to wholeness beyond the universal, same as you, a psychological time construct reacting to timeless truth, there is this tricksterishness. Let me see here, if I can read my own typing. Oh, well, I guess I just say this about tricksterishness here. Yes, it's happening at times of change. I guess this is the important point. Like, so I think like the tricksterishness is happening at times of change in people's lives. This is what George Hansen notes, the liminality of it. And obviously, indeed, in the 1800s, societally, it's got to present, you know, it's got to shapeshift into out of angels, demons, fairy lore into UFOs and alien lore, because that's where we're going. But that's not to say that even for experiencers, let alone normies, it's happening at every change in your life. So in other words, it's not mechanical like that. It's not as though you have a life change and mechanically a trickster phenomena pops up. And it's at certain points. There's a decision being made there, is my point. And again, sometimes that decision is the cusp of great life changes. But sometimes it is as a warning of like, okay, when you're too heavily invested in this interest, we're going to pop in and say, no, it's not that. We've just negated that. We're also negating the alien, because what alien would do this? What alien tax dollars are going to this project again, you know, as I love to say. And in the same thing, you know, you could argue with the virginity thing. It's not just a momentous losing your virginity. It's that I thought you know, if part of my psychological dysfunction was like I didn't want to be in a real relationship because I didn't want to bring this into someone's life, and then they don't, I'm afraid they're going to show up, and they don't show up on that first night. And I breathe the giant sigh of relief that they have not shown up. And then they show up the next night. If they don't show up the next night, do I stop believing any of this? Because at this point, like the closest I saw the shadow being when I was in high school. I had the dream where I saw through the dream where I keep waking up out of the dream and waking up into different incarnations of myself waking up. But then what secretly is going on beyond that is that I'm lying on a table being stared at by these grays in tunics. But in reality, I leap out of, bed. So was I there? Was I out of body, but still on a table? Like, that doesn't make sense. Like, I could talk myself out of, at this point, believing that any of this stuff outside of the 8th grade UFO was a reality. Maybe I could have a normal life, Maybe me and this gal could live happily ever after, or the next gal who comes along, and I could live a normie life and have debunked all of this for myself. Except then the next night they show up, and there they are, and it's not I'm asleep, it's not a dream, and then, it's the most blatant in-your-face thing. So it's calling attention to, we're not the alien thing that you're afraid of that would show up on the night you're losing your virginity. But that doesn't mean this mystery with a capital M that isn't real and isn't in your life. You need to wake up to this. That is the meta message of that. And when I go back to sleep, and I don't even want to deal with that because that was so frightening, because for some reason it's always so frightening, even when nothing frightening is going on. A year later, I'm going to have that synchronistic callback that's going to tell you, you got to wake up to this. You can't just ignore it. But when we call all of that trickster phenomena, when we just keep it as though there is trickster phenomena, that it sounds malicious. In this, how I'm explaining it now, it's not malicious. But if you say trickster and it puts you in mind of like Loki or something, you know what I mean? It's like, oh, there's this invisible, formless awareness, this god or something, this devil that's screwing with me personally. Well, no, that's not what's going on, but all of the tactics that they use fall into, that trickster archetype, that pattern of, waking you up indirectly through weirdness and fear and whatever, things that jostle you and jolt you out of normalcy. All right, so next up is, how can you tell the difference between the real and the universal? I'm just going to check the chat to make sure you guys are alive. Looks like everyone's okay. All right. Take another swig of the water here. All right. Well, before I get into how can you tell the difference between the real and the universal, or the real and the universe, I should say that part of how I got to this was by not ignoring, during the I am experience that I talked about, seeing and being the universe exploding into existence out of nothingness. I am that nothingness. I am that universe. I am. That the thing that precipitated that was, again, the feeling as though somebody, a surgeon, slices you open at the base of the spine and this energy pours in and then I pour it out. But also that there was a sense of people in the room. And in my book Urgency, the way I dealt with the people in the room was, I thought, because the initial thing, until you leave your body or appear to leave your body, there's other things are being activated in the brain. And so maybe that oh God, what do you call that? Michael Persinger, he's got the God helmet that you put on, and then you have these hallucinations and you feel as though there's people in the room. Maybe something like that is happening. And so just this feeling of, but people in the room that aren't really there because your brain is like being so triggered. But no, I think that was wrong. I think there were people in the room. I think that these beings are that. I think, I'm not going to talk about the Kundalini stuff in this final episode. Maybe we can talk about that later if you want to still do live chats. But except to say that, as I've already noted, there's a difference between Kundalini and this other energy. The Kundalini is something, if I shut up for a second, if I become silent, it starts moving around and doing stuff. But this is not something that I shut up and it slit opens up and magic happens. This is someone else is doing this. This is on someone else's timeline. So this to me is evidence that there are in fact these multidimensional beings who are there, who are like, okay, you're ready for this. Here we go. And I guess I should also, do I talk about this now? Okay, maybe I'll talk about this right now, just real quick. Just to reiterate, the one thing that I talked about in that I am experience that was of a different quality of consciousness than the everything was specifically being a sun. I talked about being stars and they're immensely ancient and they're all interconnecting and they all kind of know each other and they're working on projects called life. And that this particular star that I was inhabiting in that moment, I had the sense in the moment of the experience that was going to be, that was a future life if I don't, if I can carry on in the universe here and I don't screw up, if I am a good person, whatever it is, I don't know what the qualification is to become a star, but that I would become that in a future life. But I also knew in that moment that I am that right now, because obviously I am that right now. So how does that make sense? It makes sense when you realize the nowness, right? Once I'm out of the nowness moment, I'm back in time. Once I'm Jeremy again, I'm back in time. And so if I continue on in time, maybe I become that sun at some point. Maybe I experience myself as becoming that. But that sense of becoming, that sense of time, is an illusion. In the pulled back now perspective, I'm already there. And I'm me, and I'm everything, as are you. So, okay, I'll just leave that there. So let's go to how can you tell the difference between the real and the universe? Good question, me. There are a few ways. Unlike other paranormal phenomena, we just talked about this, you deeply feel that you know what this is, even if it's consciously a mystery, and it wants you to remember that. Right? That's the important point. So I read to you Pamela's blog. Yeah, I guess just in addition to what Pamela wrote in her blog about differentiating, good and evil, and all that. In that first dream, where I'm waking up out of a dream, waking into another, and at the same time, what I really am is being abducted by aliens, who are sort of either, I don't know, showing this somehow to me, or the pretense, I guess, is that I'm actually lying on a table and this is either a smoke screen so I don't know what they're doing, or that they're inducing this dream within a dream within a dream for whatever reason, to show me something as an experiment, whatever, whatever an alien would do. I don't know. But if you'll recall, the thing that plunged me through the wall into that whole thing, once the dream became lucid in the beginning, it was like I was sitting under the bed with my friend Mike, And I became lucid in the dream. I just became self-aware that I was dreaming. I woke up into the dream. And as I was prone to do, when I woke up into the dream, as I normally would do, I was like, oh, Mike, now's my chance to like talk to my own unconscious mind and see, are these abductions real or am I crazy? Like, what's really going on? You know, and I'm telling Mike, tell me. And at first he's still trying to be the dream character. And then eventually he realizes I'm not going to shut up. And so he says, you know, if you want to know that, you've got to first figure out when they come for your sister, right? Like he says something like that, and that's what begins the rest. But how he says it is the multitonal demonic voice. He becomes demonic. And as I've already explained to you, and I can't believe I hadn't gone back and looked at this, but I find out later through confronting dream characters that these demonic evil dream characters are actually my own defense mechanism. They're me. They're of my unconscious mind. I suspected that these were these other beings or this trickster entity, you know, puppeteering in my mind, keeping me asleep, keeping me unaware of what's going on. But I actually confirmed to myself through a moment of complete clarity in a lucid dream much later in life that no, much to my chagrin, they're me. They are aspects of me. And so now if I take that knowledge back to this experience way back when, Mike is me. Mike is the demonic thing isn't demonic, in other words. I am literally, the demon is me. The demonic stuff is coming from me, which is kind of what Pamela is talking about. Yeah, that was me telling me that at that early age, but I couldn't hear it. So, and I've already talked about the Ouija board thing. So, you know, again, how can you tell the difference between the real and the universal? They want you to know that you know what this is. They want you to remember that you know what this is. And it's, so in other words, you know, if the Ouija board week thing were real and demonic, our Lord and Savior Satan would, there would be no point of, during that week, sandbagging it and screwing it all up by injecting this, you know, shadowy being walking into the room and me not associating that with the Ouija board and the devil week, right? Like, it's kind of where you want me to go with it. But I can't, because it's not, because that's this other thing telling me, no, you know what this is, and it ain't that. Wake up. Okay, so the second way you can tell the difference between who's communicating what is communications are about waking up, not journeying down further and further rabbit holes. So as I said, if you're not careful as an experiencer, you may be driven to paranoid delusions. I've certainly dabbled in that early on. The universe, of course, is fine with that, and so are you. The real, not so much. The real doesn't really want you to be going down these crazy rabbit holes. You want that, even though it is a delusion, even though it is crazy town, even if it is scary and paranoia-inducing, it's the devil you know. It's at least the known. It is within the field of the known, which you are. It is not the unknowable, right? So, isn't this interesting? The field of the known, the duality of the evil and the good. Of course, you know, unless you're in your wrong mind, if you're in your right mind, you want to be as good as possible. And the evil thing is, oh, it's scary, but it's knowable. So even in a tiny little fraction of an amount, it's controllable, or at least you can feel as though you can do something about it. The unknowable is, I mean, we inoculate ourselves against it at all costs, even though it is truth. Because it's not you. That's the authentic not you. So, yeah, you'll go through all kinds of craziness to not ever have to deal with that. You will do substitute versions, carbon copy versions of enlightenment even, or in this case, you know, the alien, you'll engage with that for as long as it takes. And if you wake up out of it, you're just going to probably switch it out you're going to move the goalpost, like switching religions. You're going to switch it out this for this. And they're both going to be within the field of the known. Because that is your happy place, because that is what you are. You are the field of the known. The unknowable shatters you. Don't want that. Right. So what's interesting is the universe, even for a guy like me, wants to wrap all this stuff up in the universe, right? So, like, for instance, I talked about with the Kundalini stuff and the waking up through that. Answers want to become you. And I was inoculated from that because I sincerely took to heart and was the Krishnamurti urging of, well, first of all, he never says what is going to happen. He just says, you gotta want to be open to the mystery of it. You gotta want to, the only want you can have is to find out for the sake of finding out. And I really wanted to know what this Kundalini thing was about. And so every stop along the way, hey, now you're a psychic, now you're a healer, now you're a crazy guy doing lunatic moves. Now you can bring a yoga into the world and sell that. Any of these types of things that I could become a master of and sell, ultimately, those are enticements out of getting to the end of the journey here, or at least that leg of the journey of, which it requires you be completely open. And I think one of the ways the universe tries to reel you back in and not engage with timelessness beyond being a fishing lure for novelty for the universe is the whole thing with the Falun Gong. The woman coming up to me with a newspaper and Falun Gong, and these Falun Gong people like nodding, and then I go to Yale University to visit my sister, and I'm in the bookstore, and there's this book on Falun Gong, and it says moon people showed them these moves and these postures that, while they may not be exactly the same as what I'm doing, it's close enough to be so relatable that would I were someone else, maybe I'd become a Falun Gong practitioner. Maybe I'd go to a Falun Gong thing and tell them my story and become a somebody. Or, if not that specifically, the other thing, I don't think I talked about this during these, but I've talked about it before a little bit. It's kind of, it's not really embarrassing. It's kind of funny. But it's as if, and is, I shouldn't say it's as if, it is that when you have these experiences of timelessness and of the new, that again, the universe wants to contextualize you within itself. And so it was trying to make me in the imprint of a different archetype, perhaps the archetype of the poser, because I was literally like wandering around the East Village, like, I would look at, like at flea markets, there'd be Buddhist statues and Buddhist trinkets and stuff, and they'd be doing these poses. They'd be, all these gods and stuff. And these poses are things that I would be doing through, or the Kundalini would be doing through me. And so then I would go and look them up and be like, okay, what are these poses? What do they mean? And there's always that flavor of Asians, right? The Falun Gong thing. On the other hand, the recurring dreams that then became like the dojo in hell, and there are Asian people there. I've at one point a Buddha came awake in the body. I don't know that I talked about this on this thing, but that happened, So I think I am to become something of that, but I'm an American and I'm ignorant or at least I'm uneducated in the ways of anything other than what I've seen in movies and stuff. And so, like I'm wandering around the East Village like, boy, I'd really love to wear that silk kimono for the rest of my life, Like maybe that's me. Maybe I wear like silks and stuff like they do in these Asian movies. I don't know if it's Japanese. I don't know if it's Chinese. I don't know if it's Thai. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't matter. I'm a white guy. It's a smorgasbord. Eventually, I would end up sort of the archetype of the poser if I did that. If I had the money, these are expensive clothing items, and I didn't have the money, thank God, because I would be the guy with the man bun wearing Asian clothing from some culture I don't know anything about just because it felt right. You know what I mean? Like that, I would have been that guy. Maybe this is why I'm so hard on everyone who is of that ilk, because they're but for the grace of shutting up and not engaging with it, go I. But again, it's like this pressure to imprint upon you a new category because you're now different. And also to go back to like, okay, well, it's aliens, Jer, you know, like, it's Asians and aliens together again. I mean, there's your new movie. But if you ignore it, then you're back with the real, right? If I don't ignore that stuff, I don't think I'm having the big universal I am experience. I just don't. I think that's not a guy who's ready for that. That's a guy who's now trapped in another delusion or trapped in the workings of an archetype that he is now unconscious to and becoming. So the third way that you can tell the difference between the real and the universal is the real would not communicate during impossibly confusing times, such as a mental breakdown, a hallucinogenic trip, a hallucinatory mental illness episode, or hypnosis, or whatever else. So the real is often wrongly associated with obfuscation, not its real modus operandi, which again is self-negation. So it's not obfuscating itself. It's not hiding, through lies, essentially, or through our own delusions. You know, I've talked about it that way before. Jeff Ritzman and I used to talk about it that way. That's how we sort of entertained it, but it really isn't that. It's not obfuscating, it's self-negating. So the real says, I'm coming to you in this costume, this alien costume, but you have to figure out that it's a costume. You have to do a little work. You got to chew your way out of this cocoon, bud. The universe, however, says, no, I am that which you believe me to be. And so the real will not come to you. Yes, they show up in dreams, but it's obvious that the dream has ended and a communication has begun. Right? And perhaps they'll show up in plant medicine journeys for like shamans and medicine people and the like, but that's because those people are experts in discernment in whatever it is that they're ingesting and that state of mind. If they know how to navigate that state of mind, they're going to know the difference, perhaps for them. But for a guy like me, like, I'm not going to start doing shrooms or DMT or whatever and have a real spiritual experience. And on that note, I will say that not only have I never seen an authentic spiritual of the real or of truth or of these beings, either one, in any of the YouTube videos or conversations I've had with people who have done DMT or ayahuasca or any of that stuff, it's all of the human collective. Not only, like, I know that from just witnessing it and what I've gone through and knowing the difference, including the fact that I don't think I really touched on this, but later in life, as you know, if you listen to Paratopia, Jeff Ritzman and I did shrooms. I did like this much shrooms, and Jeff did like one cap or 2 caps or whatever it was. He cheated. But I had never done a hallucinogen in my life. This is after the I am experience. This is after the Kundalini. This is years after all of that. You can't know that that's not enlightenment or that that's not even going anywhere in an out-of-body experience or a multiverse or whatever, unless you're me, unless you've had these other experiences, right? So please get there so you can see the difference. The difference is the shroom trip, at least, was like being tickle tortured, and the real truth is like understanding the joke completely. Yes, you're laughing in both instances, but one is like an entity torturing you, tickle torture, and the other is you understanding the joke because you are fully aware in all the ways that you need to understand all the aspects of the humor that you laugh naturally. So, and this is just a carnival ride of like dream stuff happening in the room at you, or you close your eyes and it's a completely different experience, and it is as if you're traveling somewhere, but you're not. And this was completely frustrating to me, as opposed to like natural. And just last night, I watched Dr. Dennis McKenna of the McKenna Brothers in a conversation with the otherwise unrecommendable Jordan Peterson, talking about exactly this, about are these plant medicine journeys, and they were talking about ayahuasca specifically, but all of them in general, are they bringing you to somewhere legit and other, or are they all archetypal and of the collective mind? And they both agree they are all collective mind. Dennis McKenna does not believe that you're going anywhere and seeing anything. And he gives examples of how this is so, one of which is like his brother Terrence talks about seeing machine elves, and then suddenly everyone's seeing machine elves, on DMT or whatever. But, this is a guy who has spent his life studying this stuff, and he's saying you're not being brought anywhere. I also, when I spoke for author Tom Cheatham for his seminar series on me, I showed up. He had a person in there who was, I believe, a psychiatrist, not a psychologist, but one of the two, who runs an iboga workshop or something in South America. And I got him to admit. So he's someone who is looking at iboga, which is another one of these. It's from Africa, but of course he's like a French guy using an African plant medicine in South America because we're completely fucked up people thinking we can just do this. Nevertheless, he's doing it because he wants to see if he can extract a psychological or a medicinal value for the pharmaceutical industry, essentially. And but also, he finds this stuff to be enlightening. He finds it to be otherworldly and all that. And I got him to admit during this course, much to his chagrin, didn't much care for me, I think, after this, but he did admit that it's not that it is all of the mind, that it is all archetypal stuff, that there is not the death of self there that is required for the authentic wholeness experience, or wholeness of being. I shouldn't say experience, but the wholeness of being. It's not the death of self that occurs, it's the recontextualization of self that occurs during these hallucinogenic trips. So all of this is to say that you ain't going to find the real there. You're going to find bigger, broader, and in some ways more helpful in your journeying between the two poles here in human world, but not the real. And so I don't think the real is going to talk to you there because it would just be too confusing. You would just confuse one with the other. Unless, again, you're an actual shaman or something, not a weekend warrior shaman. So the fourth way you could tell the difference is the real does not tell you you're special. For instance, you're not going to ever get channeled messages or synchronicities with numbers that lead you to the next event, to the next, to the next, to the next. To that person who has a message that's just for you, and all that. The universe wants you to be the star of the show. The universe wants you to create your own reality. The real does not want you at all. The real wants you, the shattering of the self for the real to become the, or at least for truth to become the. And I guess on that note, maybe it's just helpful to note the difference between, there are, in the hierarchical sense of spiritual experiences, There is, if you're going to stay here, it's better to be better. So yeah, transcendent include being a dick, if you can. I'm just saying that there's this other sense of being that we ultimately need to be. But if you're going to stay in the cocoon until we murder ourselves, get comfortable, I guess. Yeah, do the transcendent thing, and of personal evolution, I guess. I can't remember what I was just going to say about that, but it'll come back to me if it's important. Real does not tell you you're special. That's what I was saying, right? Okay, so the next is the real does not promote your personal evolution. It nudges you to wake up out of something. Nudges you to wake up to everything, actually. The real sees the need for the cessation of self, not the furtherance of self, and for the real to also be you. Oh, I guess what I was going to say is, like, in some sense, I am talking interchangeably about these beings and the real or truth or timelessness, because to interact with us in this way, they've got to be awake to that. Because like I'm saying, consciousness has a ceiling or whatever, fullness is fullness. And so they are, so even if, I don't know if this would be the same as what Krishnamurti was talking about in terms of avatars coming out of that consciousness. Maybe there is that too, out of truth, but there is at least also, or maybe only, I'm not sure, the interdimensional thing of, like, when one wakes up into truth, one then understands the rest of the sleeping universe as itself and must do what it can to one waking oneself up. Oh, that does remind me of what I was just going to say, which is, so in the realm of, us, normalcy, there is that transcendent thing of interconnectivity, of understanding ourselves as interconnecting and all of that, but that still isn't oneness, because you can be interconnected, but that isn't you waking yourself up. Right? Like, there wouldn't be the project of you waking yourself up. I don't remember where I needed to go with that. I'm just going to leave it for now, and maybe I'll do another one of these. Who knows? But not this seminar series. It'll be something different. All right. Okay. So that's really, I think that's basically everything-ish. The only other category I have here is, how are they doing this? Which I think we've already covered. We've already talked about non-duality. Maybe I'll just read this and see if it's coherent. Sometimes I write notes to myself that are completely coherent. What I have written is, beings out of time see all of us, our entire lives. If there is reincarnation, our past and future lives too. All of what we were, are, and will be is always already happening now, which we have already talked about this. Thus, they can pick an event, like me losing my virginity or the Ouija board thing. They can shine a light and float a craft on cue with my thought, with other witnesses at any point in my life when it makes sense to do that. It is up to me to see through the alien events. That is, to see just how personal and un-alien they actually are. And again, the reason that they have to present as alien is because that is how we're thinking of ourselves. We're thinking of ourselves at the turn of the century there, back in the 18 to 1900s, as people who are living in the future, right? We've already got this sense of a future that we're building toward, of exploring space and all of this. Of course, all of that is secretly just our conquest drive as white people, which we've then exported to the world. Roughly speaking, whatever that is, that has infected us, this sense of, like, consuming, greed, expansionism, all of that. We call that our natural drive into the future. It's natural to want to go to other planets. It's not natural. This technology is not natural. That's why these nature cultures all around us never built them. It's not because they aren't smart enough. Clearly, they built like pyramids, some of them. Like there are marvels and feats beyond what we understand currently that have happened in the ancient past, and yet it's all within the realm of the natural and not, sending ourselves out into the world, into the universe as we are, as like this just virus through like, sociopathic billionaires. That wouldn't be a thing naturally. So I think we have covered how are they doing this. Except to say, but they can only do so much. They cannot wake me up to wholeness any more than I can wake you up. They can just point to something and hope I engage with it in the very narrow, fragile way I must for authentic change to take place, a change out of time. And I think we've talked about this too, that the immense timeless energy of silence, of no psychological machination, no movement in psychological time, how that is unknowable. Knowing it kills it. And this point is everything, the fact that knowing it kills it. This point is everything because the intelligence we call alien is playing by the rules of the unknowable. This is why they don't care what you call them. Why they conform to our vision of what they are. They are not born among us as humans because no one would ever believe them in this day and age. I guess that's the other thing. In Krishnamurti's day, aliens weren't the thing. It was still spiritual masters, ascended masters, So that would be the archetype or the mask that they would engage with from the enigmatic other. So they are not born among us as humans, at least anymore, because no one would ever believe them in this day and age. If we did, we'd immediately build a useless cult around them. So they skirt around the edges of perception. They speak to us in every way in our languages, for me in English, but also in dreams, in visions, in synchronicities that force me to work and find their meaning in places like books or online, or in the fortuitously timed conversations with others, all of which call attention to the fact that means of communication is irrelevant, right? So this to me is the point, like when I'm saying they wouldn't want you to go down rabbit hole after rabbit hole, it's something you could easily do because, again, they're speaking in synchronicities, which, as I talked about previously, leads me to the computer, which leads me to this quote that talks about how, whatever, William James answers this question that's been on my mind, But that's it. That's the end of that story. There is no further, then I go down an internet rabbit hole and I'm in QAnon all of a sudden. No, that would be the universe talking to me. But I think the other story to the synchronicities is the fact that like the means of communication is irrelevant. They know all the languages. They know the computers. The second we invent them, they can infect the computer and you can have, as happened when we talked to Colin Andrews that one time on Paratopia, his bank of computers starts shutting down one by one when we're in deep conversation, You can have meaningful things happen in something that was just invented. How would they know to do this? Because time isn't unfolding. Our time isn't unfolding for them. It's all apparent right now. The cat and mouse UFO games they play with pilots speak the same message. How we think this relationship should go is highly irrelevant. And so we, and so are we, and so are we, as we are. Oh, highly right. Our relationship with them is highly relevant, and so are we, as we are right now. Except as a people to poke and prod at into waking out of ourselves. So in other words, we're not important as we are. We're not special. The poking and prodding is to wake you up out of being a special person. If we don't do it, sorry, the chicken doesn't peck out of the egg, the chicken dies. That's where we are. That's just where we are. And, personally, if you're going to die and go into reincarnation or an afterlife or something like that, that's all still here. That's all in this. And, if we do blow up the world, what happens to this? If there is global climate change, odds are there are going to be, bands. I'm not saying if there is. Obviously, there is global climate change. And obviously, I have seen a cataclysm coming. Well, are there going to be survivors? Probably. And will they go on and rebuild and the whole rigmarole? Probably. But let's say they didn't. Let's say we just nuked the place. What would happen to human consciousness, that human stream? All those heavens, all that reincarnation, gone. So that's a problem. The irony is you got to have this urgency to wake up, and yet I can't scare tactic you into waking up. But you should be scared, like we are. You should realize, what you're doing here, destroying the world. Okay, so I'll just repeat that. And so how we think this relationship should go is highly irrelevant. And so are we, as we are, except as a people to poke and prod into waking up out of ourselves, which means catching on to the next meta message here. But we rarely get that far because we're so stuck in our projections of what they are, what we are, and what we need to do to control this. Right? This is the problem. The paradox for them, I guess, is you got to interact with us in some way that is recognizable in the field of the known. You build it up, you create an architecture of the alien so that we can relate to it as a thing we're going to meet, But then it's so freaking fragile because we want to run with that, take that ball and run with it and build cults and build religions and build ufology and build cottage industries and build... every time I take a picture of a light in the sky or a bug in the room, it's an orb, and it's there for me. And I'm psychically communicating with that flare drop in Phoenix, Arizona. The point is we live irrelevant lives, but it needn't be that way. Let me see, is this important? Let's talk a little bit about this. I guess that wasn't the very last thing. Let's talk about the architecture of the messages a little bit. This is going to run a little long, I'm sorry. So, harken back to the Quick Parade, which was that first thing I remember from 2 or 3 years old. There's a parade out the window. It is there just for me. I'm special. But of course, that's speaking the language of a child and getting you interested and getting you to look, right? The Quick Parade introduced me to a conundrum. I was the center of attention of the leader of a parade that existed, apparently, for me to notice it. Right? This parade exists for me to notice it. It's not a real parade in the street. Presumably, if there's anyone else in the street, they're not seeing it. So either it's directional or it's projecting out of me in my, my still wide open child imagination. I haven't blocked off through years of training to become an adult. One of those two things is going on. In any event, at the same time, to excitedly share this with my mother and sister was to be confused as to where the parade went and ultimately humiliated by my mom, who didn't believe me. At the very least, this type of thing is building a callus to people scoffing while demonstrating that I am alone with this, right? So this is a young age to be to feel humiliation, but it was that. It was I don't know if it's emasculating at 2 years old, but whatever that feeling is of oh, my mom doesn't believe me, but it was there, and now I'm angry, and she doesn't believe me, and it's embarrassing. I'm being scoffed at. What's it doing? Is that evil? Is that an evil trickster? Or is that building a callus toward the scoffing that I am going to, while also telling me, right, that I am alone with this? There is no one else. Part of the reason that this is a taboo subject, again, part of the George Hansen Trickster thing, perpetually a taboo subject, I believe, is because while it needs to be a societal issue enough to keep it in the collective consciousness for you to interact with it as an individual, you have to be individual with it. These experiences are for you to wake up. You can't do it in a group, as we said. It's following, in other words, while it's using this trickster template, whoever these beings are actually using, they're speaking the language of non-duality, of truth, which is, you have to do this. You have to sit in silence for truth. It's that same sort of thing. You're with this. And so I think that's part of why it stays taboo in the culture, is because otherwise there would be this wide acceptance, this belief, and we would never actually see our way through it in the way that we need to, or it would be another barrier to seeing through it in the way that we need to. It's also a demonstration of how this is for you, the individual, and perhaps directional, as I said. Okay. So, architecture of the messages. Okay, so we've talked about the multiverse and environmental collapse a little bit. Let's review those messages now. I don't know that we need to do this because I think we kind of honed in on this, but let's do it again. I just briefly, from the dream when I was in high school of being at Neverland, Michael Jackson's ranch, and seeing this aquarium full of all kinds of land and sea creatures and birds and stuff, all creatures, all collapsing in on themselves, and then sludge or oil pouring through the pipe that was the water giving them life, and then hearing that female voice explaining to me, this is what you're doing to the world, or this is, what we're doing. I don't remember if she said you or we, but I think we'll get to that in a second. It wouldn't surprise me if she said we, let's put it that way. But that's an early on environmental message. And then there's the vision of the world rotating and, an ice sheet coming over America. And then there's the dream dolphin who tells me get to Hawaii, even though I'm coming to Hawaii because there's some calamity coming to the eastern half of the country and everyone's going to want to move west, and then the grid's going to be down and you're not going to be able to get to Hawaii, all that stuff. Talked about all of this already. Why would there be this focal point on the environment if they were not intimately connected with us to the extent that they, in fact, on some level are us? And again, the psychological answer to that is, well, you're fantasy prone, and they are you, because just like the archetype is primordially you, so kind of are they. They're splintered aspects of you don't want to deal with through your own trauma and what. Except that we can cut through that BS because we've already seen that there are multiple witness encounters involved in this, right? So that doesn't play. But also, I know through the spiritual stuff and the Kundalini stuff, I'm sorry, I know that often, at least if you follow me online anywhere, people often get me confused with a debunker, and maybe I even confuse myself with a debunker sometimes, and I have to remind myself that no, magic exists in this world. You can't unscience your way out of me, or you can't science your way or psychologize your way out of, all of a sudden, from understanding what Krishnamurti was saying so deeply one day, this energy rose, and all of this stuff that he never spoke about started happening. And if I just shut up for a second, this energy takes over and does things that are healthier than I will do. No, I'm sorry, that's not me. Magic exists in this world, because that's not the only thing that happens when I shut up and do the Kundalini or let the Kundalini stuff do me. It's just the stuff that I've talked about. But the other stuff has more multidimensional elements than that. We'll just leave it at that. I mean, it's not stuff I haven't talked about. It's just stuff I haven't focused on. Because much like Krishnamurti, I know that you want to hear the powers. And you want to hear the really interesting stuff. It doesn't matter how interesting I've already made this. You always want that next thing, right? That's part of the craving, the seeking, the keeping you. Okay, so they're not just connected with us. They're not just concerned about nukes because we don't know the physics is real, something ripples through all dimensions and affects them. Again, climate change, why would that do that? It's us that they want to wake up for a reason, because we are they. And we're ourselves at the same time. And sort of interestingly with that, I hadn't thought about that till just now, but talking about the other things here, I understand hither, thither, and in that understanding shall neither be swept away nor carried on the seas of time. And do we humans not understand that other planets cannot help us if we continue to block them out and kill ourselves? Those are both we. This woman telling me this disembodied voice telling me this, or telling me these things, is saying we. So that when I retell it, I'm saying I, and I am saying we. Right? She's not saying you people. There's more to it than that. It's this inclusivity, which you could, it's cutesy to say it's inclusive because we are one, but functionally, it wouldn't be anything more than cutesy to say that. But it is real functional to say, I'm going to say it this way, and when you tell it to people, you're going to then say we. And then they're going to take it in that way. Oh, this is about us. Not as a persecution. This is what we are. This is who we are and what we're doing. Although I guess you could make an argument that the do we humans not understand was the universe interfering at that point, pretending to be that woman and giving me a contactee message to concentrate on, except that also going on with that was the Lizette Larkins talking to extraterrestrials in the background over and over and over again, which then was I don't know if you would call this a synchronicity, but a sort of psychic prediction of the learning addicts calling me to teach Lizette Larkins talking to extraterrestrial class so that I would hearken back to this and realize I can't ignore this. So that part is not the universe doing that. So I don't think that the do we humans quote is the universe. I think it's just something that on the surface sounds shallow, but I just haven't played with it, and maybe I should, because I've often wondered, what do you mean by planets? Do you mean, because again, it sounds like, aliens from other planets, channeled beings maybe, but she doesn't say beings on other planets, she says, do we humans not understand that other planets cannot help us? What does it mean that they would help us? What does the word planet actually mean? And what does blocking them out mean? I just haven't sat with it. Okay. Now, the time that I remember her definitely saying you was in the lost your virginity thing, where I'm standing there and I'm saying, why am I seeing this row of tables with naked people on it? And she says, because you've always wanted to remember an abduction. Well, now that's personal to me, right? So that does make sense to say you, because you've always wanted to remember an abduction. Now, the scenario doesn't really make sense. It's like a rationalization, but if you really look into it, it doesn't make sense that you show up the day after I lose my virginity, that I'm fearful you're going to show up. You show up the day after. Yeah, I guess I've always wanted to remember an abduction. Like that. Again, trickster element, but nothing evil going on. No evil entity called Trickster. It's just how this thing the tools that this thing needs to use. Or these beings need to use. But again, so I just want to make the difference there. Like, that is an answer to me personally, and so she's saying you, as opposed to something that is that is impersonal, that is for all of us, which is we, which when I speak it is about you. It's for you too. Is not just the message a message, but also how one comes to such a message through synchronicity or in the midst of another event. Is that its own message? And, you know, asking things like that, though they're riddly, are not rabbit holes. They're just riddly. Okay, and I talked about this. Okay. Yeah, it is interesting, again, if these are aliens, you know, coming to Hawaii and having everything change. I don't know if I talked about this, but so our duck, Blondie, has had a foot injury for weeks, and she's finally better. But for weeks, and it happened at a time when, like, everything was being topsy-turvy. Carol went to New York because it was her mom's 99th birthday. And then when Carol got back, her mom got sick, and she thought this might be it. And she went to the hospital, and maybe Carol's going to have to fly back. Maybe her mom's going to pass away. We don't know. So all this flux, all the topsy-turvy, you know, perfect time for a trickster element. And on top of that, so, you know, we've got to take care of Blondie, which means, you know, it's work. And as we're trying to isolate her and keep the ducks isolated and not running around the yard, trying to do our best to preserve her, out of nowhere, another duck, Penelope, dies. And we barely have time to, you know, this happens at night, right when they're feeding, that I discover her. And so it's like we go and we bury her under rock in the pseudo-Hawaiian way. I mean, we didn't put her in a sack or anything, but we didn't bury her in dirt. We put her under the lava rock, and we said a few words, but we didn't really even have time to mourn her. You know, all of this is happening and more, to where you get the feeling of, like, should we even be doing this anymore? Should we even be here? Are we cut out for this life? Are we where we need to be? You know, you get all of this sort of like, And we consider this a bird sanctuary. How much of a bird sanctuary is it when we can't even, you know, help our own ducks? And then I get, or we both get a text from our neighbor who's saying, hey, do you guys realize that you have nene birds living on your property? We're like, what are you talking about? Now, nene birds are I think they've been taken off the extinction list or near extinct list or what, you know, whatever. But they're a goose, a quiet goose, that is the Hawaiian state bird. It's indigenous to Hawaii. And we've always wished that they would come live here because, again, we consider this a bird sanctuary, so we would love to have nenes here. And now all of a sudden, in the midst of this maelstrom of bird death and, you know, injury, and should we even be doing this anymore, nenes are living on your property, and he sends us a picture of where they are. So to me, that's a sign. That's a sign of, yeah, you're doing the right thing. You're where you need to be, all of that. Now, that doesn't mean that translates to a sign as you, the listener. You could be like, yeah, so what? That happens all the time. But to us personally, it's a sign, and it's a sign in nature. It's a sign that is very Hawaiian, literally a Hawaiian bird. And that wouldn't happen if we were in New York, right? Like, the signs wouldn't come that way. So what is, if this is aliens from outer space, if this is just interdimensional aliens from another dimension, doing the same thing that aliens from outer space would do, why do they have to play within the confines of the cultures with whom they are interacting, the people with whom they are interacting? Why would they have to do that? Could just be synchronicities on my computer, or me slipping and falling and winning a lawsuit or something. I don't know what, you know, like, it could be other things that are more American. But they're not, because that's not where I am. All right, let's keep that in mind. Is there anything else that needs to be said? Not really. I'll just close it out by saying thank you for indulging me these many weeks. And again, I'm not 100% sold on this. It makes sense to me. I can see I do need to pay more attention to the fact of beings in the room during the I am, the irony of like being the oneness experience, being induced by other beings, the duality of non-duality there, right? But also that this whole thing, again, came to me, which I had written up in greater detail, not in the same way that I've explained it here, but differently. In I'm to tell you this and I'm to tell you it is fiction, it all came in one fell swoop like truth does, even though this isn't truth. This is, could, as Krishnamurti didn't want to happen, neither do I, become its own mythology. So saying it out loud like this risks that, and so keep it a fiction. We don't know that it's true, but what it is, well, two things. One, I'm hoping it shows you what depth looks like when we're talking about this stuff. Because again, depth of talking about the alien isn't just like, ooh, talking about a taboo subject out loud. That feels deep, right? Because no, that's not it. And like just saying, oh, trickster theory, and not advancing anything for, tens of years, decades and decades. It's not a science. Science is not going to answer this. What are we left with? We have to figure out what the deep thing is, but unfortunately, that may mean that we no longer get to be here, right? Because we can't anyway. This is what's going to kill us. Now, inevitably, it's going to anyway, because not everyone's going to hear this, and if they do, it's not going to wake them up. But you're hearing this. So you got to sit in silence here and figure this out, because I think like it may be the case that unless we are non-dual, unless we are timelessness flowing through time, we're never going to understand what's going on here, who these enigmatic others are. And so we can theorize till we're blue in the face. So again, this doesn't mean that what I'm presenting here is 100% correct. Personally, I think it is closer than anything I've heard before. But even if it ends up being wrong, it's still in the right direction of non-duality, of our full sense. In other words, we're constantly asking who these others are, and we don't know who we are. We don't know what a human being is, except hypothetically, theoretically, whether you believe me or not, or you've heard some other thing that you believe that kind of sounds like this. We live hypothetical lives, and we can't do that anymore. You can't ask, hey, what is the real from a hypothetical life? We live in metaphors. Oh, it's like this. It's kind of like that. It sounds like that. Don't we have to be the full, whole expression of a human being before we have a prayer of understanding what another whole being is? How can they even meet us as equals if they can at all? Clearly, they're communicating something. They want us to wake up to something. Why don't we? Have you ever asked yourself that? Like, why am I dragging all this crap to me? Why do I want to make it? Because most of us don't even like ourselves, right? Like, not really, or love yourself, maybe in the narcissistic, way that you're trapped as a 2-year-old from some shit your parents did. You love yourself a little too much, but really that's code for I hate myself, and have covered it over with this fake sense of love, this narcissism, this arrogance. Like, we're not real happy, If you take anything away from Buddhism, it's that we're all born into sorrow. When you talk about the pendulum, you're talking, the aspects that are the good that are you are small aspects in comparison to the good, the right, and the true of truth. So why aren't we being that? Why are we just having like little experiences of that and then bringing it back to our crappy, miserable sense of self to to explore and get a temporary high as the person who is special or in control or whatever of that. And then moving on to the next thing, moving on to the next thing, moving on. And that's if we care at all. Most people don't care to even have this conversation. And I fear that we are getting worse with that, with the attention deficits and the materialism and, now, everything's about computers and data and, dry, cold, mechanical language. We are turning ourselves into the archetype of the robot because we already are artificial intelligence. Sit with that one. All right, that's it. Now I'm going to look at the chat, which means you're going to stare at my head. Even worse than normal because I can't right now sign into the thing that makes the screen bigger. So here, enjoy my head, and let me look here. Oh, I can't move this screen up and down, can I? Crap. You know what? I'm not going to be able to read this, but I'm glad to see everyone is chatting, and if I see any questions in there or anything that sparks a further insight, I'll go, ooh. And maybe we'll do a live stream. Because like I said, I want to do more live streams. I just don't want to do a Culture of Contact seminar series. I want this to be its own thing. So maybe we start doing Wise Ask. If that interests you, let me know in whatever way you get through to me. Ko-fi.com/JVay. If you're in the chat, you're seeing that link. Go there, sign up. It's free. It's easy enough. And we can, chat there and set things up for a next time if you would like. Or if you know me on Facebook or any of the social media crap, go find me there. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Threads. I'm on Blue Sky. Why I'm on these things, I don't know. I really want to be off Twitter. That's what I want to be, but nobody seems to want to go anywhere else, even though they hate Twitter, which is really a metaphor for all that we've been talking about. Why don't you want to go to the better thing when you're constantly griping about how much you hate the thing that you're in right now? No, it's better than the devil you know. All right. And on that happy note, again, thank you all for listening. Thank you everyone who donated. Thanks everyone who's already signed up. And now go spread this, right? Like if you are on Twitter or wherever and you see a conversation or an argument over the latest Lou Elizondo, Jeremy Corbell footage disclosure conundrum, just go park this there, right? You don't even have to say anything about it. Because somebody said, I'd like to do that, but I feel like with my friends, I'd have to explain what it is. No, I explain what it is. Just go park this somewhere. If you want. I mean, obviously, don't feel forced to do that. But the only way to ever, get this out there is to get this out there. It's got to be organic. I don't care about self-promoting and going on all kinds of shows. I mean, if shows come to me and ask me to be a guest on them, I will likely do them. But I'm not going to go self-promote. I'm done with that phase of my life. So please get this out there if you care to in that laziest of ways. That's what I'm going to do. If I see conversations about, what do you think alien abductions are? I'm going to be like, And I'm going to say, when I do it, because after the Enlightenment comes the trolling. Which actually reminds me, God, every time I think I'm done, I'm not done. Because I feel like I need to close out on this note. Don't know if I talked about this on this episode, so I'll be real brief with it, but, I mean, not on this episode, but in this series. Where am I in this? Because I've talked about all of these so-called enlightening things. I've had these experiences. I'm clearly not the me that I was before, but I'm also obviously not, Krishnamurti or Eckhart Tolle or, I can be mean and sarcastic and all that stuff. So I don't know if I talked about this here or not, but I've talked about it elsewhere. A dream that's not a dream where 3 seals come up out of a pool. The one closest to me stares into my eyes, which plunges me into another vision within the dream of my sister being brought into a room by some dude in a military garb as a little girl. She's like 5 or 6 years old, and I'm seeing this, and she's turning around and just looking at me, and she looks sad, and she looks scared and confused more than anything. And I feel horrible, like something horrible is going to happen here, and I could stop it. It's within my power to stop it, and I feel terrible, and I got to help her, but I can't, or I don't, or I won't, or something. And like in the dream, I think I'm like crying, or, you know, and then the vision's over, and I'm back to being stared at by these seals who aren't seals. And the one closest to me says something along the lines of, "You still have attachment, you're not ready." And they all get back into the water and swim away. Dream's over. I jump up and I'm blubbering mess, and I like actually texted my sister and was like, "You remember when we were kids? I know this makes no sense because I would have been like somewhere between these ages of 0 and 3. But apparently this, you know, could have happened." It just felt so viscerally real that I had to ask if she had any weird memories from then. Not that I ever thought like a military person took my sister, but just, was there something around that age that was odd that's being alluded to? And the answer is no. And for the longest time, even on Paratopia, when I recounted the story, I would cry. I would start crying. It was like that viscerally, like impactful, even though, again, you look at it, nothing real is going on there, outside of the fact that I'm being told I'm not ready for what's next. And I think that that is true. And whenever I've told this story to people and said that that is what that is, that those seals, and people in ufology will jump up and be like, "They're really aliens." And I'm like, "Shut up, I know, but the aliens aren't aliens. I just explained it for 2 hours. I say to them, they say, whenever I tell them the story, they say, "Oh, well, that's awful, that's evil, because we all need family, that sense of attachment. You need that sense of attachment." Now, as far as I am concerned, every like real hoity-toity mystical person throughout the ages has always talked about non-attachment, right? That's what this is. And it's a lesson of like, no, that is what it means to be unattached to everything for the next, whatever is next, for me. Has nothing to do with you. You need to deal with you, you as a sense of self. I can't do that because I've done it. So I need to do the next version of that, which fractally is probably the exact same thing, but through a different means and in a different way. Because I have calcified in some way. I can't be the ghosts of my psychological baggage, which are constantly trying to reapply themselves. I can't unknow what I know and unbe, that to an extent. But I can degrade quite a bit, which I have over the years of just living a normal life and whatever. Hasn't affected the Kundalini at all or any of that, but I mean, certainly that sense of interconnectivity and being from heart and that's not something I am terribly invested in anymore. Let's put it that way. It's something I completely understand, but I'm not there in that space, and I have attachments. They may not be the same old attachments that I've had, but I think the lesson there is like, right, you have to be nothing, you have to be nothing, And if something makes you cry, then you're, again, it's what I said to you before, like if you're ready for what's next, you would already be what's next. If I were ready to be the thing that I am pointing to here for all of us, I would be that already. And I'm not, because I think, as I told you, I chose to come back. That choice after the I am experience may have been a false one. It's quite possible that once you're back in time, there's, again, the illusion of movement, the illusion of choice. And just like coming and going from the body is kind of an illusion. If you're all one, and this picture is already always happening, then I'm not really moving through my body, but I've got to perceive myself that way because I'm in time. I'm in it. I'm in the picture. I'm a detail in the picture. So if I'm back and I remain a detail in the picture, then the environment around me, and which in this case means like the baggage, psychological baggage, or just the normal like being a human stuff, in the non-whole way of being truth flowing through you, becomes you. That this truth flowing through does remain an experience that I will have from time to time, but it is not me. I am the blockage to the flow. Less than you are the blockage to the flow, but still a blockage. A blockage is a blockage. So it doesn't, more or less, ultimately doesn't matter. It just means that I know some things through experience that you don't, that you know through believing or disbelieving, but we're both still in the same boat, you know? So I got work to do. That's it. I mean, that is the message of that. Yeah, I don't know. I was just gonna, well, maybe I will say, I mean, the irony here of like the people who say like, well, but family is everything. I mean, you can't be unattached to everything. I don't know. I mean, my sister and my dad and I had a falling out years ago, and we only got back together because I reached out and decided, he can't really bother me in the way that he used to, where we are in life now. So it's okay that he never apologizes or sees any problem at all. It's okay if he ignores the problems. I choose to have this relationship, and so we're going to have it. And with my sister, we had a falling out a few years ago, and nothing is resolved. And to my mind, it's the same thing. Like if she ever were to apologize, that's fine. We would have a relationship. But the point in telling you this is like this specific image was of my sister, and the feeling is like, oh my God, no. But in reality, just a few years ago, we had a falling out and we haven't talked since. So it's actually been fine, this not being attached to family, into then choosing to have them in your life when you're ready, or if they decide that like they've actually changed in the way that you need for them to have a healthy relationship, right? Like these are the choices. Either, you know, one of you is unhealthy or both of you, and you both need to be healthy to have a healthy relationship, or you need to decide that it's okay that they're unhealthy. Or maybe you're delusional and you're the problem, you know? However that pans out, the point is, in the moment of the vision, of the dream or whatever, yeah, the emotion of like, oh my God, no, I can't do without this person, doesn't actually reflect reality. And that those emotional attachments actually are unhealthy, which I guess maybe is its own other show, because how do you talk about this without like devolving into nihilism or something? It's only because that's what would happen for you. Because of where you are. Like if you're hearing this and you take it to heart and you're like, oh, I don't need anyone. Well, yeah, that's a problem because you're not authentically saying it from a real authentic point of view. You're just copying and then putting it as part of your, you know, screwed up reality tunnel. I'm saying it from a different screwed up reality tunnel, so it's authentic. Anyway, I just want to throw that out there because there may be a point where, like, if you do see through yourself, if you do have that moment where the brain shuts you off and you know, all this action starts happening, that may not be the end of the story of waking up. If you have a moment of choice and decide to come back, don't do it. That's all I'm saying. I have done it so you don't have to. I have kept the door open so that you can walk through. So just don't do this to yourself. All right. And on that happy note, I'm not miserable. That makes me sound depressed and miserable, and I'm not. I'm just saying it can be different. All right. That's it. I am done. I love you. Good night, everybody.